Welcome, everyone, to another podcast with Ron Denner, your host for Personal Growth Recipes. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go into a subject that I've always wanted to talk about. It's got a lot of mysteries attached to it, but I'm going to try to unpack the mystery here for you, okay? My subject is economic myths and truths. So we're going to get into economics. You may think that's kind of a boring subject, but I'll give you a little light on the subject to keep it in everyday terms, and hopefully we can all kind of learn something here. So, like I said, I decided to pick this topic because really it's created just a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration for a lot of people. Now, the study of economics is really not covered very well in our education system. But the bigger issue is that when it is taught, there's explanations that are simply not accurate, just mainly because of ignorance. But our economic system has really been transformed when you think about it, just because of the technology and really most recently the internet. I'm going to talk a lot about the internet later here. So I want to attempt to explain how we got to where we are today and what happened in the prior years up to this point and how we got to this point. You know, I do a lot of reading. I read a lot of books. One book in particular I really caught my attention. It's got kind of a funny name. It's called The Next Millionaires by a gentleman by the name of Paul Zane Pilzer. But really, what I really liked about that book is he explained economics in simple, easy to understand language. So I'm gonna take a lot of his information from that book and transfer it over to this. And what he does, like I said, he explains where our economy has been and where it's going, but more importantly, what you and I can do not just to survive, but really to prosper in the years ahead, because there's a lot of changes going on and there's a lot of fear. So we're going to address that. But we can also learn a lot from history. I'm a big history buff. We can learn a lot. Now, I'm familiar with a guy by the name of Abraham. You know, back when I taught Sunday school, my days of teaching Sunday school, Abraham was a very important figure from the Old Testament. He had two sons, was what he's probably most known for. One son by the name of Isaac, which really is from where the whole Christian religion movement started, is because of the one son, Isaac. His other son, Ishmael, actually started the Muslim religion movement. So that's probably what he's more well known for in the Bible. We're not going to go into religion here, though. We're going to keep that just for someone else to explain. I'm not going to go into religion, so you're good. But Abraham, what a lot of people don't know and don't understand, he was the first person probably in the history of mankind to discover the history of the principle of free enterprise in economics. Now, Abraham, he pitched his tent in what is now modern-day Israel, the country of Israel. And what he discovered is that instead of what they did back in those days, they would roam about from one piece of land to the other, plant food, and move on to the next. They just kept roaming around. And what Abraham proposed and did was settle in one place, domesticate the animals, and plant seeds. And by planting food and growing it, in effect, he was making his own food. So literally, Abraham went from becoming a nomad to a farmer, which is known nowadays as a modern-day farmer. He started the farming industry. But the story of Abraham is really the story of a radical transformation that occurred from one kind of economy to a whole different kind of economy. We'll get into that. So think about this. So back in the day, a hunter or gatherer would go out, wander the land, take food, find it, and they would move on to the next piece of land until that became exhausted. That was the norm back in those days. So most everyone did that. One tribe went from one place to the next, just simply going on. By contrast, what Abraham did, they laid claim to a specific piece of land, stayed there. They planted the seeds. They grew a continuous, yearly, renewable supply of crops. But because nobody would spend the time cultivating the land that they occupied back at that time, farming is actually predicated on the concept of land ownership. So think about that. The whole concept of land ownership. So rather than going out scavenging, searching out wealth, and being dependent on the land and the weather, Abraham literally became in charge of creating his own wealth. Now imagine how hard it must have been for those people at that time to grasp that concept. That what they were used to is pretty much going out, you would start a war, have a war, kill each other over food that God put there. And they figured, well, you might as well just stay there and it's your food until it runs out. You go to the next piece of land. But so to Abraham's neighbors, Abraham probably seemed like a lunatic for doing this. But what Abraham realized is that people could become very prosperous if they just simply would strive to create and improve their own property instead of crossing over the borders and trying to seize other people's property by force. And if you really think about it, going forward from that time, really the rest of human history since then is comprised of that happening. It's going on for over 5,000 years. And unfortunately, this is a pattern that we're going to see repeated over and over in the history of free enterprise. What you have is innovation and advancement that's simply met with resistance and incomprehension. And it's still with us today. A little history lesson. So Abraham, he got us pointed in the right direction on economic growth. But it took a couple thousand more years after that to go on to the next great discovery of economic growth. And that discovery is trade. Trade. Now, the Roman Empire at the time was the most powerful country on the planet. And they understood that in order for them to finance their great military might, they needed economic growth. And what they did is they covered Europe with a network of marble highways, roads, in order to establish trade routes. As a matter of fact, a lot of those marble roads are still in place today if you go there. And let me clarify why trade developed as the next accelerator of economic growth. You know, at the time when we were all hunter-gatherers back in the day, we each had the same general skill set. We were literally jacks of all trades and masters of none, as they say. But as we became landowners and we settled into communities, what we did is we began to individualize, and we each developed our own skill sets, which led to even more trade, ever-increasing trade. So the more that we invent and specialize, the more that we develop our own unique skills and produce, the more that we need to trade with others for their skills and produce. It just makes sense. And the greater and greater diversity of skills, it just leads to more trade. And increased trade simply leads to more wealth. In fact, the only true limit to the wealth of an overall economy is how many people are there available to trade with. Now, this is why merchants and traders have always been the wealthiest people. They simply bring specialized produce and goods from one place to another, creating value by virtue of the trade itself. If you need proof in modern day terms, look no further than Sam Walton, the Walton family. Some of you are familiar with Jeff Bezos and Amazon. They're in the trade business. And they're two of the wealthiest families in the world. Now, There's also there's a social fringe benefit to all this trading. The growth of trade in a diversifying economy means that we have to learn to get along with a variety of people, including more religions, more cultures, and more different ways of looking at the world. So if you had to summarize what's really wrong with the world today, it's that in a world of over 6 billion people, this is crazy, only 1/4 of the world, 1.5 billion people, are involved in free trade. The other 4.5 billion people do not have access to free trade. And unfortunately, free trade is the ability to produce something and share it freely without the government suppressing their actions. And the challenge really is with these 4.5 billion people that simply don't have access right now. The challenge is, how do you bring this amount of people into this type of free trade environment, while at the same time you want to really prevent the political instability that's going to result from such a rapid change? So it's got to be done probably incrementally, is what some economists are thinking. But difficult though it is, it's inevitable. The clock cannot be turned back. And technology is simply not going to slow down. But this would literally bring the rest of the world up, their standard of living up so much higher, if we could involve them in free trade, literally. Let's go back to Abraham here for a second. Now, one of the big problems back in Abraham's day was that in agriculture, they needed to find ways of predicting the seasons so that farmers could maximize their crops. Now, people knew that there were cycles of hot and cold weather, but they just struggled. They struggled to make sense of it. They could observe that the planets kind of wandered around the Earth. They could sense that was going on, but they really didn't understand the relationship and the conditions on the Earth, how it affected it. They just simply could not come up with a consistent, logical way to account for the passage of time. The great philosopher, scientist Aristotle, he called these planets giant rocks and observed that they were literally in a fixed orbit around the Earth. And what Aristotle did is he worked out a calendar of 12 months, 365 days, and people would, at the time, they used this calendar to predict the seasons and even the trade winds to apply to their farming and to bring some order to their lives. And here's the amazing thing. We, even though Aristotle's calendar is based on the planets orbiting around, or the Earth orbiting around the other planets, whatever, it's not accurate because it's based on the assumption, planets orbiting around the Earth, the wrong assumption. That's why we've had to add leap years to the calendar. Now, so what happened was problems continued with the calendar. So about every 100 years, it would snow in July. So they cranked back the calendar 6 months by a decree of the Pope. And this began about a 500-year quest by astronomers to find the perfect calendar. Now, at the heart of this quest lay a problem that really prevented its own solution. The problem was in the nature of the question. The question being, astrology was the study of how all the planets revolve around the Earth. The very definition of the problem precluded anyone from coming up with the right answer. The answer was outside their field of vision. They literally had tunnel vision. It wasn't until the Polish astronomer Copernicus proposed the opposite. He proposed that the Earth and the other planets actually revolve around the sun, and that we found a way of fixing Aristotle's work by turning it on its head. And it was about 80 years after that, the Italian scientist Galileo had invented the telescope. And with that telescope, he literally just was able to demonstrate that Copernicus was correct. But Galileo upset the traditional establishment with this new way of thinking. And matter of fact, it upset the establishment so much that he was condemned to burn at the stake because of it. It disrupted their thinking so much, their tunnel vision. And ironically, the Pope at the time was one of Galileo's best friends. So what Galileo really didn't have a choice. He recanted his discovery just to save his own life. And it wasn't until 1992 that the Pope officially issued Galileo a posthumous apology. A little late, right? But, it's that kind of tunnel vision that said the planets revolve around the Earth, that declared the Earth was flat, that declared Abraham was nuts for wanting to own and cultivate his own land. That kind of tunnel vision is alive and well with us today. And it literally is crippling our understanding of wealth and the economy. So, for most of us, economics is probably the most important science in our lives. And I'll explain why. Our choice of a career, the type of work we do, it's a pretty big deal, right? So economics today is where medicine was 200 years ago. It has its medicines and procedures, and they sometimes appear to work, although they sometimes kill the patient in the process. But there's no clear theory to explain why they work or don't work. Most economists, and I'm going to include most politicians, simply don't know what's going on. And it's my hope, like I said in this podcast, to give this some clarity, some understanding here, okay, as we go forward. One of our most stressful and pressing issues that we face as individuals and families is our finances, which is really the heart and soul of economics. Hopefully, by better understanding economics in today's world, we can hopefully take control of our own destinies and instead of feeling kind of out of control, frustrated. Once again, this is my purpose for covering this subject, economic myths and truths. Let's begin with the definition of economics. So I'm going to give you just a basic definition here. Economics, when I was in school, I remember this kind of, it's a study of society's allocation and the distribution of scarce resources. It's the study of society's allocation and distribution of scarce resources. Now, this assumes that there's a limited supply of land, fresh water, minerals, and vital resources. So it becomes a matter of just how do we divide them up among the people of a specific country. But the core idea is that we're running out of everything, and this has held our thinking hostage for hundreds of years. Now, remember the fiasco back in Galileo's day? The very definition of the problem stops us from coming up with the right answer. The idea of limited resources is false. It's just simply not true. When you begin with an assumption that there is a scarcity of resources, what happens? You go next door to the next country next to you, you kill them, confiscate their property, their resources, and it keeps repeating itself. That pretty much, folks, is a history of war. If you think about it, the entire 20th century was about fighting over which system is the right system to divide these limited and scarce resources. World War I, World War II were pretty much about that sort of thing. Some countries chose communism, some chose socialism. One distinct point I want to make here to draw from this, really, the most expensive commodity in the world is ignorance. That was all pretty much based on ignorance. So as a side note, one of the best solutions for preventing wars is free trade. I'll give you an example. Right after World War II, Germany and Japan were our two arch enemies in World War II. We, in order to rebuild our economy, plus help them get back on their feet, the United States began trading with Germany and Japan. And that literally transformed their economies back to get them back on their feet. And if you think about it, there's really no way now, and even after that happened, for Germany and Japan to ever go to war with us again. Why would they want to? We're trading partners. We kind of have become dependent on each other. So it's just something to think about. Remember the false assumption that our natural resources are limited? Here's why that's false. I want to explain that. There's no resources to run out of because all resources are simply inventions of the human mind. Resources are simply unlimited because our minds are unlimited. Give you an example. Some examples here. Back in 1971, scientists predicted that in 20 years, we would run out of oil. But what nobody anticipated was the invention of the fuel injector, which replaced the carburetor, which simply tripled the gas mileage on vehicles. Also, prior to 1970, in order to get oil out of the ground, they could only drill about a mile underground. That was it. That's all the technology they had. But by 1980 and beyond, the technology now allows them to drill up to 8 miles or more underground. So now we literally have tripled the amount of oil we can pull out of the ground. So you see, it's this technology that's changed. Some other examples, pretty obvious. Look at just the appliances we use in our house, the electricity, the lights, how that's improved. So what's going to happen is our technology advances are simply going to lead to new improvements. The next big thing is renewable energy. That's the next big thing coming. And our country grew richer by not going next door, taking some other country's land resources. How our country actually grew rich is technology. In 1930, 30 million of the 100 million people in the United States were farmers. Almost 1 out of 3 people were farmers in 1930. And those 30 million people could barely feed the 100 million. But by 1989, the number of farmers went from 30 million down to 3 million. And those 3 million farmers were not only able to feed, by then the country had tripled to 300 million people. Those 3 million farmers are not only able to feed all the 300 million, but have 50% left over for the rest of the world to sell to. That's simply amazing when you think about it. It's just that the improvements in farming technology, yield, crop yields, etc. So the old formula for the wealth of a nation was simply dividing the physical resources among the people of that country. That's the old tunnel vision, the way of thinking. The correct formula for the wealth of a nation, you want to multiply the physical resources times the technology available. That's which is the innovation and creation of the human mind. You have to factor that in. One last thing on technology. Now, the advancement of technology is really determined by the exchange of information. 10,000 years ago, the written word actually created civilization. And with the written word, what I mean by that is I could write down a farming technology or something I learned, and I could literally pass it on to my kids or the next generation. And when you think back, the next great massive change in that that technology was about 600 years ago, the printing press evolved. And what happened was the printing press accelerated the information exchange, and it literally created the Industrial Revolution. That's very, very important. Now, the same thing that happened by the creation of the printing press is now happening more recently in our society, the technology, the computer, and specifically, once again, the internet. And I'm going to cover this in more detail here in a second. So since about 1980, the technology changes have really taken off. This has resulted in a number of changes, a lot of manufacturing jobs being eliminated. In the 1970s, over 300,000 people were employed making carburetors. But the fuel injector comes in, and all of a sudden, 300,000 people are now out of a job. Gone, just like that. Over 100,000 people were employed making vinyl records. I grew up, that's all we had, vinyl records. They were the thing. Until about 1985. By 1990, the last vinyl record plant was closed, replaced by CDs. Look at the VCRs. In about 1996, there were over 135 million VCRs in United States homes. 8 years later, 2004, the DVD actually replaced the VCR. Another 100,000 people lost their jobs. So when you look at this, what's happening here, changes that used to take 50 years are now taking place 5, 6, 7, 8 years or sooner. They're happening much faster. The automation with robots and manufacturing it's eliminating jobs. And this has caused a lot of fear, as you could probably imagine, from all this unemployment that's going on, especially in manufacturing. And really, it's just better technology that's going on. So, seems like a lot of bad news, but I want to assure you that we don't have to sit back and wait to become another victim. What I want to do is I want to give you an illustration of how this unemployment problem is actually it's an opportunity for us to advance and improve our lives personally. So here's the silver lining to all this, okay? I want to kind of take in an imaginary journey here for a second. Now, imagine a self-sufficient desert community island with only 10 families. And all they have to live on is fish. 10 families. So each day, the 10 men go out in their boats with their fishing poles. The 10 women stay back with their children. Kind of sounds like the 1950s to me. Now, along comes a missionary. Now, this missionary, he shows them a new and better way to catch fish, a net. With this large net, it only takes 2 fishermen to catch what it took all 10 fishermen to catch. But now, they've got a big problem. See, unemployment just went from 0 to 80%. 8 fishermen are now unemployed. So the island now they have a problem. How are they going to feed and clothe these 8 fishermen and their families? Well, one thing they could do, they could pass a law and outlaw the net. Sound crazy? That's been done by some countries, some societies. They can impose an 80% tax. Well, that might be a solution. Sound crazy? Between 1913 and 1960 in the United States, we had our top marginal tax rate was 91%. And actually, today it's about half of that or a little bit less. Now, let's return to our island community for a second. So what could our friends do instead? Well, they could help the 8 unemployed fishermen develop new jobs to try to add to the wealth and prosperity of the island. I'll give you some examples. One could learn medicine and try to raise the level of health for the other people on the island. One could learn how to make better roofs, better huts for the people. One could study learning to hopefully increase the education and creative abilities of the island members and their children. So what's really going on here is that they could then take their newfound skills and barter and trade with each other. Thereby, what they're really doing is they're increasing the wealth and the overall health of the economy and the lifestyle for the island. You see, they were only fishermen. They got by as best they could. And it was only after better technology with the net, which increased their productivity 500%, and unfortunately created 80% unemployment, that these new jobs began to exist. So just as the human mind increases our physical resources, the human mind also will create new jobs that simply didn't exist before. And this, folks, this is one of the most difficult concepts to understand because of the enormous paradigm shift that it represents, which simply is unemployment is the first and only sign of economic growth. It's a total paradox. Now, I have compassion for people that lose their jobs because of these displacements. It's tough, but it's here to stay. Okay, we can complain about it. We can run to our government officials, ask to put restrictions on businesses, extend unemployment. But honestly, these help. They're just Band-Aids. I prefer to focus on a long-term solution. And in my opinion, personally, the solution that makes the most sense to me, we retrain and retool the workers to embrace these new technologies and equip them for the new opportunities that are going to pop up. I mean, this is just the beginning. We haven't seen anything yet, okay? Besides, we can't all remain fishermen forever, right? So hopefully that helped kind of clarify some of this material. Now I want to jump over quick. I want to share one other important economic principle. And I call this principle the velocity of money. The velocity of money. Now I'm going to give you another little story here. This one is actually true. Our daughter lives in Nashville. We're about 600 miles away. And my wife and I will go visit quite frequently. And usually on the way down, we'll stop someplace in southern Illinois and catch a motel and head down the next day the rest of the way. But let's take you on a trip here. Let's say, we're heading down to Nashville to visit her, and it's getting late in the day, so we decided to pull over, stop at a motel, small town, very small town. Matter of fact, this town only has a motel, a grocery store, a massage parlor, a bar, and a gas station. That's it. So I go into the hotel. I always like to check out the rooms first. I've learned that over the years. And I asked the hotel owner at the front desk, here's what I'll do. How much is a room? Well, $100. Okay, sounds fair. So how about if I do this? I'll put $100 on the counter and let me go look at the room. And if I decide I like it, I'll come back, take it. If not, I'll take my $100 and leave. That's fine. I lay the $100 down on the counter. I head to go look at the room. And immediately after I leave, the hotel owner takes $100, runs across the street to the bar, hands that $100 bill to the bar owner and says, "Sir, this is the $100 I owe you to pay my bar tab." The bar owner looks at the person sitting across the patron across at the bar and says, you know, that $100 I owe you for the groceries at your grocery store, here's that $100 to repay you for those groceries. Now the patron, who's the grocery store owner, he looks at the guy next to him and says, Bob, you know that work you did on my car? Here's $100 I owe you for that work you did on my car, because he's the mechanic in town. Now Bob takes that $100, and there's a lady sitting at the end of the bar. He goes down, hands her the $100 and says, ma'am, he says, that those massages you gave me at your massage parlor, here's $100 I owe you for that, all those massages you gave me. The young gal takes that $100 bill, runs her right across to the motel, and says, and the motel owner happens to be her boyfriend, says, honey, you know that $100 I owe you? Here it is, we're even. She leaves. And the hotel owner puts $100 back in the counter. So in the meantime, I come back, decide, I'm not going to take the room. I think we'll go on to the next town. I take my $100 and leave. So what just happened here? Well, in that instance, everybody was paid. You see, the velocity of that $100 bill was multiplied by 5 because of the number of hands that it went through. All 5 of those debts were paid. And the reason I tell this story, one of the biggest challenges of economic growth is not a lack of money, but it's what I call the velocity of money. The velocity of money. You know, right now we're going through the coronavirus scare, huge upheaval in our economy. We don't know yet where this is going. And this is really what's killing us right now, is it's stopping that velocity of money. So hopefully that kind of makes sense to you. It's a pretty good example. Now this takes me to the final part of the podcast, and this is what I refer to as, what does this mean for you and me, mostly you personally? What does this mean for you? You know, today, your work or your job is really not defined by your family, your name, your location, or even a one-time career choice. Your work is really defined by your skills and how well you keep up with the fast pace of all these changes. This is kind of hard to believe, but today the average career only lasts about 7 years. People are constantly changing, some more, some less. The average is about 7 years. But the skill that I'm really referring to is your ability to learn new things. Once again, with the introduction of the internet back in 1995, this has really opened up just a whole bunch of opportunities for all of us. If you remember that throughout history, I talked about, one of the critical factors in economic expansion has been the building of roads. Remember the Romans, the marble roads? And these roads have been one of the really big factors to move as far as getting information exchange and products and services. So imagine now what the internet offers. It's really been called, I've heard it called the superhighway, the information superhighway. What we really have now is instant, real-time communication between consumers and ourselves. We really don't have a middleman anymore. And back in the industrial age, if you wanted to start your own business, man, I tell you, there are some big obstacles. You had to go out and rent a building, own it. You had to hire employees, pay for equipment. Just some huge financial obstacles to overcome. But the whole game has really changed now that we've gone what I call from the industrial age to the information age. And with as little of a startup cost as you can literally start a business now with a laptop computer and a printer scanner in your spare bedroom. I mean, that's as basic as you can get. And, back in the 1950s, when a product was manufactured, about 80% of the cost of that product was in making the manufacturing of that product. About 20% was distribution. That formula has now switched around. To make a product today, about 80% is distribution, 20% is only manufacturing. Why is that? All the technology improvements, look at the improvements, the automation that's going on in manufacturing. So what does that mean for you and I? The money, if you want to make money in products, the money is in distribution, free trade. That's where the money's at. Once again, if you want proof, look at the Walmart, Sam Walton, Jeff Bezos, Amazon. Simply right there in front of us. So if you can develop the skills to distribute products to the internet, this is really a great opportunity to increase your income. And one of my goals in future podcasts, I want to find someone that I can interview, or more than one, hopefully, that's done this. And hopefully we can gain some insight and pick their brain. So that's one of my goals in future podcasts, so we can hopefully, if this is something that you want to maybe pursue personally. We have a conversation going on right now in our country about the haves and the have-nots. And I want to make something real clear here. There is absolutely a big difference in income between the haves and the have-nots. There is absolutely no question about that. I've studied this in a lot of detail over the years. But rather than jump on the bandwagon and complain about it like everyone else seems to be, I just kind of sit back and ask, why is that so? Why is there a difference? And what are the haves actually doing different? What are they doing different? You study both groups. Their IQ levels are not that much different. Their childhood environments are not that much different. So here's what I discovered. The have-nots trade dollars for hours. They trade dollars for hours. Now, they work 40 hours and get paid for 40 hours, okay? Nothing wrong with that. I'm just trying to make a point here. Now, the haves, the people that are higher up on the financial scale, they do not, I repeat, they do not trade hours for dollars, okay? I can't stress that enough. What they do different is they multiply themselves and they multiply time. How do they do this? Well, there's different terms. The one I've like to use would be residual income and duplication. Duplication is really just simply adding locations or hiring other people to leverage your time. You're literally duplicating yourself through other people. If you've ever played the game Monopoly, imagine buying 5 hotels and then collecting the monthly rent on those hotels. You're literally getting paid while you're sleeping. That's what I mean by residual income. Now, there's one common denominator in all of this. In order to accomplish residual income or duplication, what these people did is they started and they owned their own business. Now, it's extremely difficult to accomplish this as an employee, okay? Very difficult. If you're an employee, unfortunately, very difficult to do. So my advice, if you're currently an employee, is to start your own business as a side hustle, as I call it. It's going to require a lot of extra effort and time. And there's going to be some temporary sacrifices. But I want to just kind of lay it on the line and be upfront here, okay? The number one obstacle, in my opinion, to starting your own business is a fear of failure. Now, there's 2 basic ways to start your own business. Number one, you can quit your current job and start your business. That to me is the riskiest thing to do. Now, a less riskier approach, number two, would be to keep your current full-time position and then start your own business, like I said, as a side hustle. This is the approach that I've used personally, and I've seen other people do it and do a lot better as far as surviving those first few years, okay? I've always made the comment, it's taken me about 5 years to become an overnight success, okay? It doesn't happen right away. And I don't want to give any false illusions here. I know, starting a business takes a lot of work, a lot of time, okay? It's just not for everyone. And we need to accept this as part of human nature. But my goal is just simply to make you aware, if you're willing to step outside of your comfort zone, what's possible, okay? I have a very important lesson to understand in building a business. We're in a free enterprise system here in the United States. There is one absolute truth that you must understand. We are paid in direct proportion to the value that we bring to another human being and the number of human beings that we serve. I'm going to repeat that. We're paid in direct proportion to the value that we bring to another human being and the number of human beings that we serve. Sounds pretty basic. So, if I operate a conventional business in a small town, I live in a town of a little over 400 people, and if I'm trying to compete in a conventional business against someone that lives in a town of, say, Madison, 100,000 people, they've got a pretty big advantage over me, I would say, okay? But that assumption, folks, that's before you factor in, once again, the internet. Because now with the internet, I can literally serve the whole world. I am not limited to my 400 people in my backyard. I can serve the whole world. It's a game changer. Now, if distributing a product does not appeal to you, another option to consider is what I call the information business. Now, the information business, in my opinion, offers the greatest opportunity I've ever seen to scale a business in my generation. When I say scale a business, I mean to really expand it and grow it out. What I would highly recommend you do sometime, I watch a lot of videos in my free time, YouTube videos. There's a gentleman by the name of Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm going to spell that one. Vaynerchuk. Gary Vaynerchuk. Go view some of his YouTube videos. He, in my opinion, is the information guru of the web. One word of caution, he swears a lot, so I warned you. But he is very intelligent. He is extremely informative. I have learned a lot just watching his YouTube videos, okay? And we as individuals, we're now able, because of this, we're able to compete, like I said, in any industry with any big corporation because of this. The future of business, this is so important. The future of business is establishing your own personal brand. That's been a known thing for years, but now, especially now, you want to establish your own personal brand. Prior to the internet, we would have had to rent billboard space, advertise on TV. For the little guy, we're not going to compete against the big corporations. They have way more of a budget. Okay? But now I can literally promote my or your personal brand literally out of your spare bedroom. But what I would suggest, you create a YouTube channel, Facebook posts, videos, blogs, podcasts like I'm doing. Back in the 1950s, the television replaced the radio as the main type of communication. And more recently, this thing right here, the iPhone, this has replaced the television as our connection to the world. And it's pretty amazing when you think about it, what this little object has done to our society and our culture. And I think because of that, it's ironic to me back in the 50s and 60s that, mom and pop stores were everywhere on every street corner. I know in our little town, we had mom and pop stores even in a town of 400 people. And then what happened by the mid-70s, early 80s, the big box stores came in and mom and pop stores would disappear overnight, literally, especially in these smaller towns. And what I see happening right now is that I think we're going to be going back, because of this, to the mom and pop stores. Literally, may not be in a store, but literally out of your house or whatever, okay? But I see it going back to that model, that business model. So there's hope for us, individuals and entrepreneurs. Now, if I started any kind of service or retail business today, what I would do, just my suggestion, I'd have my own YouTube channel, iPhone application, Facebook page, video content, and any kind of social media platform that's available. And I would also offer as much helpful advice as I could to the audience that even if it doesn't relate to what I'm promoting, I would just offer helpful advice. It just makes sense. This is really how you get ahead financially. This is one of the steps I've learned. And just remember, money is just an idea. That's all it is. But I could go on and on about this subject, but what I wanted to do today, I just wanted to give you an overview for now. Like I said, I talked a lot about a lot of different things. I kind of veered off here and there. Now, I can go into more detail on some of these subjects later in other podcasts, but I just wanted to kind of touch on them. So I really appreciate taking the time to listen in. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and share and leave a comment down below. Follow me on Twitter at Ron Denner. Follow me on Instagram at DennerRon. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Ron Denner. And subscribe to my personal growth recipes on Apple Podcasts. And please give us a 5-star rating if you have been enjoying it. And also, please like and share our Facebook page, Personal Growth Recipes. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday for my upcoming podcast. This is Ron Denner, your host for Personal Growth Recipes, serving up and signing off.